It is our next presenter is Nathan Fradley, who's joining us from Melbourne. So, Nathan, you're on screen. Over to you.
Hey Ma, I'm on TV. It's very exciting. It's kind of weird. I can see myself tiny in the corner of a tiny in the corner screen. Hi, I'm Nathan Fradley. I'm going to sort of build on what Timo's talked about then and a few other themes of today, and then we'll lead largely into what Toby and Demi talk about afterwards as well. But I come from a company called Ethos ESG, and I'm also a financial advisor. Um, Relevant only so far as to say I understand intrinsically the challenges in this space. And you'll notice the Canva design that I decided to use for these slides was very specifically chosen on this way as well, because I think we are largely in our infancy in this area, or we are still at the drawing board stage in Australia. So at Ethos, we've got a direct index optimizing product. We've had it for 18 months, 2 years now, and it's used widely in the States, but we haven't rolled it out at all in Australia. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think the technology to scale is getting there, and obviously like Financial Simplicity and a few other people are doing this. But I think there's also a perceived regulatory barrier. And I say that very specifically because I think there is sort of this laggard effect with financial advisors in Australia where we think something new and cool and exciting is coming out. We try and do it, and then for whatever reason, a licensee that we work with hits us, or we can't find quite the guidance that gives us confidence in ourselves to deliver something. And yeah, we're just sick of being wrapped over the knuckles for anything, so we don't stand a step outside of our box. So I think that's actually going to be our biggest lag in this space. The technology will get there much before the culture will, which is why I sort of wanted to jump in and do something today to kind of talk through that. So just a little bit on Ethos. For those of you who have seen me presented other things, I usually try and wait as long as I can before I mention the name Ethos ESG in a presentation. I've got entire presentations without flagging it, just because I like to focus on broader topics instead of just talking about what I do. But it's relevant for this because it kind of ties into how the DIO works and how I could see it working in Australia. So Ethos was started a couple of years ago, and a different ESG data tool than most others, born out of the frustrations of a lack of transparency and a lack of personalization. This is wrong, this is right, and that's it. And if you want to find out, you've got to sit on hold to get into hold of an analyst. We built this platform, and effectively everything throughout the platform is clickable. You can find the source data for everything. We don't gather data ourselves, we collate everyone else's data from NGOs, data scraping, subscriptions, that kind of stuff. And the key is through that level of transparency, we then personalize data sets. So instead of something being a flat rating of a 70 or a 4Bs or anything like that, there is a base score, but that's score changes depending on the client. So we have what's called an impact persona, and a questionnaire that I'll sort of show you shortly, which helps an investor, I suppose, isolate and illustrate what they care about. And when I say what they care about, I'm not talking about I don't want to invest in gambling stocks. I'm talking about the things that are important to me are. So we take a very positive lens over the top of it. And that then produces this persona, this idea of what's important to them. And then we overlay that on top of a particular company or investment. And the company I always pick on for this is Tesla, because Tesla can be lauded as an ESG golden stock because they do great stuff for climate change, or it can be hounded in the news over terrible human rights issues and labor issues. And both are true. So is it an ESG stock or not? It depends what you care about. If you care about climate change and nothing else, and that's your priority, it scores well. But if those things are important to you, it starts to pull down that score. And so it's not right or wrong, it's alignment. And I think that really comes back to this concept that, especially the term in the States, but call it whatever you want. Everybody cares about something. The data from RIA shows consistently every year those top three points there. 90% of Australians expect their super investments to be invested ethically, expect their advisor to provide ESG options, and almost 90% expect or believe their advisor should discuss it with them. Some extra information that came out this week. They dropped it after I'd made my slides for Monday's presentation, but I was able to add it in today. 79% of Australians believe third-party verification could alleviate greenwashing concerns. So using, tools like ours and MSCI's to be able to see why something is rated a certain way will make them feel more confident about greenwashing. And then some interesting recent stats to come out around conflict and human rights as well. I'd highly recommend everyone read that RIA report. They drop it twice a year, and it's really, really insightful. But the key is everyone cares about something. You don't have to be on a particular side of politics to care about justice or healthcare or things like that. And that's what this questionnaire does. So when an investor goes through this questionnaire or an advisor takes them through it themselves, they get to sort of isolate within these 10 areas what is most important to you. And then inside of each of these areas, there's some 4 to 8 different categories that they can then start identifying. Now, this is just what we do. There are other tools that do similar things. The point of this is an important part of the process of direct index optimization and personalizing investments is understanding the client, understanding what is personalized to them. And there's a real challenge around this, around do we just give them an exhaustive list of 200 screens and see what they can come out with? If we didn't give them a list of screens and said, hey, what do you want to include or not include as an open-ended question, would they have said the same things? Would they feel obliged to check things because they were on the list? And if they check those things, are they actually important, or do they feel like they should just say something? There's so many factors that play into this. Ultimately, they need guidance from their advisor, but that's a really important part. We need to be able to learn and discover what's important to them. It's in the code for those authorized reps. In the audience, it's within standard 2, and you need that information for standard 5. And a bit of information on that. So in the 2 years that Ethos has been running these assessments, we've completed almost 36,000 assessments. And that's across Australia, the US, and parts of Europe, so Germany, France, the UK, in smaller degrees. The number one most selected thing is everything. It's really hard to do this presentation from distance. I don't know if anyone smiles or laughs at anything I say. 88.28% of people over the 2-year time frame picked all of it. So if we go back to that question, what courses are most important to you? The kind of people who engaged with the advisor for this kind of questionnaire, click everything, which makes it kind of hard to start dialing that down. When we cut that out, or cut that into pieces, the most common themes are climate is almost always number 1. Gender equality has risen from number 5 to number 2 in the last that time frame. Sustainable resource use has sort of been around there. Peace and justice has lifted quite substantially as well. And we do see some interesting demographic shifts. For example, cigarettes and firearms in Australia generally fall as the thing they'll pick because the other things are more important. Where in the US, they're almost always a 7. And that's because we don't have the same issues that they've got. And then when we do sort of jot down from there, things like justice and equality, climate and justice, there's a theme. There tends to be the same kinds of things. The reason we're finding a lot more in this instance of people not picking everything is because a number of advisors have started changing the way they ask that question. What are the 3 most important instead of what are all of the most important? But it's just a really interesting insight into how you gain that information is just as important, if not more important, than the way you deliver it. And we need to be good at both sides. Now, this is a direct index optimization session, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we do it and what our tool does. And it's quite similar in a lot of ways to the MSCI that you've just been through. But effectively, you choose your starting universe. So you can isolate a list of, we only do ethics in our system, or environment, ESG, or whatever you want to refer it. We only do that component. So we don't have any complex financial information, PE ratios, and all that kind of stuff. What our users in the States do is they load in their limited universe. What are the stocks we would buy? That goes in. So it limits the universe, and then they align to an index. And we just use the 10-year tracking error, but you can choose exactly the band that you want to do for that. So max tracking error, starting index. You can then look at number of stocks in a portfolio. Either it can choose the number of stocks or you choose the number of stocks, equal weighted, weightings, sector weights, country weights, GIC weights, whatever you decide the limitations are, you can do so. We do have full tax considerations, so it can harvest loss and realize gains, a bit more useful in the States than it is here, just for those reasons. Platforms will tend to do this work here. but it's a bit trickier, which others have spoken about or will speak about. And then you start loading in your preferences. So I'm going to take you through an output in a second of a client, but effectively you can just choose the client. So you put the client's information in and it will align that portfolio to them. Not right or wrong, not good or bad, aligned to them. You can chuck in your own screens. Someone asked previously, how do you define those screens? Everything is clickable in our platform, and you can actually set your own revenue thresholds for revenue-based screens. So if you've got a fossil fuel screen, you can use 20%, you can use 1%. It's a slider. You get to select. And then exclusions, which I can't spell on the slide. And exclusions being company specifically or additional screens as well. So, as mentioned before, maybe you've got someone who is inherited a particular most of the portfolio they inherited is in CBA and then got it at $1.06. It's a post CGT asset because it always is. But that CGT bill is looking pretty heavy. We don't want to buy any more, but we certainly can't sell it right now. So you can load that kind of stuff in as well. And this takes about 90 seconds to 20 minutes, depending on the parameters you put in. So what does that then mean? That's great. You've now built a portfolio that's aligned to the client. The portfolio I ran came out as a base rating of 83.6 with a tracking error of 2.7%. We just used the Morningstar developed Markets X North America Index because it was on top of the list of things I could choose. 50 stocks, 1 to 5% range. No fractional stocks, we can do that. And the client was called IMAP, and they cared about climate, gender, and life on Earth, which I maxed out. I removed everything else, and I placed a fossil fuel screen on there. This is kind of a pretty common ESG aligned person. Contrary to what I was saying about everyone cares about something, I then went all the way to someone who's a big greenie. But when we actually bring them into the picture, that's the base rating of the portfolio. This is what comes out. So it's actually 90.9% aligned to them. That's a normalized number. So if you know much about standard deviation, the higher you go, the harder it is to the tighter that band becomes. The things that are going to be important to them on the right-hand side, climate, equality, and life on Earth. So a comparison to the index, a comparison to their current portfolio, a comparison to an index portfolio that's separate, or other options you're considering appear in that, and you can make those direct comparisons for them. When you're actually on the app, and it's much more impressive to use the app to do it, everything is clickable, everything is interactive. You can understand the ranges, the definitions, you can click on things and it takes you all over the place. It's a bit of a rabbit hole for those in the audience who've used it before, which I think I heard the voice of someone before who I know who uses it. It can be a big time suck sometimes because it's so much fun if you're into that kind of thing. And global warming alignment, probably it is our most used metric that we spit out, especially for someone who's climate change conscious, pretty powerful little chart. It can also spit out the similar kind of real world metrics in either an infographic or just a list of things that you can then use in any reporting, website generation, all that kind of stuff as well. And so, quite similar to other tools, and I think we're going to see a few different tools appear in the market. And the difference with ours is it's very much personalized ratings, not just personalized portfolios. But I think the key we've got to take out of this is it's not just about the tools we use, but the responsibility of the advisor to really understand our client and then use the tools appropriately. You can have the best tool in the world, but if you're just pumping out the same thing for different clients with checkboxes, are you actually meeting their needs or not? But that's the advisor's job, right? To understand and engage clients on what's important to them, whether they be a mum, dad coming into retirement, or whether that be a board with an investment decision to make that aligns with their NGO. It's really, really important to understand what's important to them. And I sort of bring that back into, I suppose, the ideal situation. And this has been sort of hinted at a few times today. And I don't think we're there yet. We're still at that drawing board stage. But I think this is amazing idea that comes along. The reason that DIO excites me quite a bit is that you could go through a normal financial planning process with a client. You can meet with them, you can understand their goals, you could map out their modeling and give them recommendations for platforms and all the rest of it. And you could have a couple in front of you and they're both completed whatever assessment or tool you use or however you've understood their values. And they're both going to the exact same portfolio. As in, it's the exact same index. For whatever reason, it's the same universe you guys select. It's the same, stocks we would buy. It's the same index asset allocation. But their portfolios are entirely personalized. They both have 50 stocks, but their stocks are different because chances are that couple care about different things. It's quite rare that they don't. So that from a client experience, from understanding who they are, from a point of difference, people really gravitate towards ETS and thematic ETS, this personalization aspect, but it can be quite clunky from implementation aspect. To be able to demonstrate this and work with investment consultants to help set the asset allocations and things like that, if you don't want to do it in-house, allows advisors to really specialize and niche into what they care about, the people they care about working with, but at the same time be able to, in a scaled manner, deliver personalized portfolios, which I think is a really exciting prospect. And the speed of technology says this is not far away. So you've got a much more effective business. You've got individualized portfolios on a completely scalable basis. Massive point of difference to a couple of years ago. And I think Australia, this was us at the last session on Monday, what can we learn from the US in rolling out what this is best practice? The US is so far behind Australia when it comes to financial advice. They're still figuring out the difference between flat fees and personalized fees. And they're fighting a war against IUL, life insurance product providers that are basically unlicensed and running around on TikTok. They're an entirely different beast. Australia is really far along when it comes to delivering the best financial advice globally. We picked up goals-based advice well before everyone else. We're now on the human side of advice. We are really meeting top tier stuff. We just don't have that scale to roll this kind of stuff out yet. And as technology advances, I think that can really change, and we can show the world how it's done, which is really exciting. What we don't have at Ethos is always important to highlight. We don't do any financial considerations, and we don't do the purchasable universe. So the users that use us in the States do all of this kind of work. We just supply either via CSV file, the platform itself, or API. We've got an open API infrastructure, the ethical or ESG considerations. We don't execute trades. That's what you work with other people for, that you've heard about today. And we don't do those reviewing portfolios, the investment strategy, all that stuff. We just supply the tool. And we've been very strategic about that, because when we start playing all those kind of games, I'm going to have to get an AFSL, and I don't want to do that just yet. So in this instance, if people are looking at this tool and go, man, that looks great, I'd love to use it, get in touch. We haven't rolled it out yet, but I have been chatting to a few people around how we could bring this to market. And if we have the demand for it in Australia, we'll absolutely do it, because as you can probably tell, it gets me pretty excited to be able to deliver this kind of thing for clients. Whether they be, extremely strongly viewed on responsible investment, or whether they just care about something like healthcare or peace and justice. That's pretty much everything from my side. We can attempt questions, Toby.
Do you want to talk a little, Nathan, just about who Ethos ESG is as an organisation?
Yeah, 100%. So we're based in the States. I run the Australian, for whatever better term, subsidiary, but it's not. I own it entirely, and I've got a distribution arrangement here. But then I work with the guys over there in developing products, and I suppose a bit more hybrid, a bit more strategic, and then sort of marketing, sales stuff. So we started off as effectively building this financial advice tool, this questionnaire that then you could deliver. Well, to be honest, I found it because I saw the reporting. So the best reporting, because that's why I got involved. The best reporting I'd seen to clients that made a lot of sense, that quantified whether something was more aligned or not, which was the constant issue I faced in advice around, is this investment actually better than that investment with regards to what my client cares about? Because they all say the same thing on their brochure. The packets are identical, but what are the nutrients like? So we started off in that financial advice sector. We then started working with a few investment consultants. So people like InvestSense jumped on board really, really early and started working with us to improve their portfolios. And that was a great growing point for us. And now we're playing much more in the private wealth sector, as well as a number of large fund managers we're working with behind the scenes. Ethos has now developed into effectively an ecosystem that connects I suppose the stewardship side of the investment business, and all the work they do on engagement, active ownership, proxy voting, all that kind of stuff. Brings all that in with data gathering and all the rest of it, delivers that to the analysts, who can then use that to make investment decisions, because the communication between those two teams is often difficult. Bundles it all together and reports it up to compliance departments to stamp, sends it to marketing and legal to stamp, and then they can start producing marketing content that has evidence behind it, so that there's no issue with greenwashing. So we're effectively trying to use this tech to solve the problems that everyone's facing at the moment. So we've come a long way from a little financial advice tool to that. And yeah, that's what we do now. So I actually, as of Monday, joined the business full time. So I finished working as an employee in advice. I'm still an advisor. I've got my own little operation as a sort of a, I don't know if you call advice a side hustle, maybe. But yeah, so this is what I do full time now is work with financial planning practices, investment consultants, fund managers on this.
Here, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Ethan. That was a very intriguing service offering. I understand that or it appears to me that you're targeting this as a financial advice tool for an advisor run through with their clients to build a personalized or individualized portfolio. Can you give a rough idea of the sort of fees that you would charge to the advisor for the use of this tool? Is it on a per client basis or portfolio value related or per recommendation made? And also going forward in time, would you consider offering this as a tool to individual investors? And how would you change your business model to accommodate that? Thank you.
That's a great series of questions. And I'm going to answer them all with 2 words. It depends. So I think the way we've used it in the States has been basically a percentage fee. So if someone owned the indexes they wanted to use already, we just charged a percentage fee on that. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was like 3, maybe 4 bips. And if someone wanted to rent the index, we would rent it through our system and then just on charge the index. We never added on top of that. So that's how we use it over there, but it's a lot different in the usage we have in the States. In Australia, just with the licensing and what have you, the pricing structure would largely depend on, and probably following this conference, I think I'll be having some conversations on this, how we rolled it out, who we partnered with, what responsibility we took in that process. Did we take more of a, here's the software, you guys run with it, or are we taking a much more active position in distribution? So I think initially that was the case. Interestingly, Ethos itself was bought by a group called ACA Group in September of 22. And around that time, we'd had several different discussions. So they're a data and compliance and consulting firm. And we'd had plenty of discussions with investment managers and ETF producers around making this retail and what that might look like. So it's definitely been something that's been fleshed out a lot. It's a super competitive market, and I don't quite think the tech was there. Well, definitely wasn't there in September 22. I don't think it's quite there now to roll it out to non-advice clients, but it would be pretty cool to be able to do that, to have some form of, there's a massive cohort of people out there who would, who can't afford advice, but something that is a quality tool, something in that robosphere that could deliver at least some basics on portfolio personalization would be pretty powerful. So to answer your question, stay in touch and we will eventually do something with this. And when I say eventually, we're still relatively small in our job business. So eventually for most businesses it's 10 years time. And for us, it's usually like 9 days. We turn stuff around pretty quick where there's demand. So sorry, I couldn't give you a better answer.
Other questions for Nathan?
A little bit of a plug for Nathan, because I think he's underselling something there. This is direct indexing. As Stuart said, we're on a sort of journey towards that. I think where an advisor can use it, and I think, Nathan, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a charging structure for that, is if you have an existing portfolio and you kind of interrogate it, and I think people like to be asked, and it can tell you in a very user-friendly, and it just sounds like him saying that. It is actually quite fun. And it can tell you what it is about that portfolio that you agree or disagree with. And I think that in itself is a good part of the journey towards there, because people like to be asked, and it does work. Is that fair to say, Nathan?
Yeah, 100%. I always run through that questionnaire with my clients, and advisors I work with don't. They send it to them, and they're like, our clients love doing it. They love sitting there on the couch before the meeting, and they'll spend like an hour going through the questions and deciding on things. Where in a meeting with me, it's 5 to 10 minutes. So it is really user friendly. So, and maybe to add on to it, the system is completely available now for advisors and private wealth and all the rest of it. And it's just a subscription based service. So it's a flat fee depending on who you are, monthly or annually charged. It has 10,000 listed and unlisted companies and 9,000 funds globally, of which I think we're about 1,200 in Australia, super funds and funds in Australia. And when we rate a fund, we rate them on their entire holdings, which is why it's taking so long for us to get Australian funds loaded, because getting that information is quite difficult. But yeah, there is a tool available now that you can use to rate super funds, funds, and stocks. I'm specifically just talking about the DIO tool hasn't been rolled out in Australia.